As we were talking about before, we've had the privilege of having a lot of your colleagues come through this fantastic summit talking about digital assets. And I think a theme that we've seen or heard is that this has been a pretty significant year when it comes to digital asset legislation. I think there were 26 digital asset related bills that were considered on the House side, 20 on the Senate side, and more than 40 hearings among the two chambers just this year alone. And we obviously have the back and forth, the letters between the administration and Congress. So it's been busy. And on top of that, Chairman McHenry established a subcommittee that was specifically focused on digital assets, which you chair, Mr. Hill. And both of you voted for two bills that have been a topic of discussion throughout this agenda, the market structure bill and the stablecoin bill. So we had Chairman McHenry with us last night, and he mentioned that before the stablecoin bill even reached the committee for markup, it had more than 70 drafts. And so clearly that bill was a product of years of conversation. And we were able to get Chairman McHenry's perspective, and Congressman Himes, I'd like to start with you. If you could walk us through, because I think you were part of those conversations over the years, if you could walk us through some critical or key moments that you felt were helpful to get the bill from where it started to the vote that we saw at the end of July and out of committee.
Yeah.
Everybody's awake now.
Thank you. It's a delight to be with all of you and with my good friend French Hill. And I guess you've heard from his steady stream of members of Congress and senators, so y'all did something terrible in a former life. I'm sorry for that. But so on the bill, this is something that's been kicking around for a couple of years. Stablecoin is really the easy one because it's sort of the magic is in the name. And I think things got serious when the president's working group issued their proposal. Not all of which we agreed with. I think their proposal was that you'd have a dollar reserve for every dollar of stablecoin, and that it would only be banks, and that gave us the impetus to move forward. And so a lot of the architecture was there, and a number of us had spent time thinking about it. And again, not radically difficult issues. If you're not going to try to get into percentage reserves behind a stablecoin, you take a lot of the difficult issues off the table. In the end, I would say, so we made good progress. And by the way, the chairman, Patrick McHenry, and French Hill could not have been more accommodating to the Democrats who are in the minority. And that's a sign, obviously, of a real desire to get something done. So, I mean, I've never really had this experience, but since I sort of at one point was the lead negotiator on the Democratic side, after I think the ranking member started to sour a little bit on the bill, McHenry and Hill were just, tell us what you need, which is not the normal course of business in the Congress. I think we got hung up on two things. A fairly fiddly technical question around exactly what the power of the Federal Reserve is to step in the event that you have a state regulator that doesn't do what it should be doing. And, it really is pretty fiddly, and it's a perennial issue in the Congress. The bill did say that the Federal Reserve could step in, but I'm told by lawyers that there's 10 more pages that you need to describe precisely the powers that the Fed has to step in, and those weren't there. I think that's a solvable problem. The other thing, and I'm going to compress my 20-minute rant down to 30 seconds, which is there's a tectonic thing going on here, which is that you have some innovative inclined members and senators who are giving the industry the benefit of the doubt. That is to say, it's something other than just a high volatility asset in which you can get lucky and make money or not. You heard my internet quote earlier. But the benefit of that doubt is running out. And why do I say that? Again, there's a compression of my usual rant. I say that because, look, we're lay people. We watch $2 trillion of value evaporate in market cap of the various cryptocurrencies, FTX. Most of us don't get any of this stuff. We just know that's not good stuff. And then you've had the prosecutions. There's just a lot of bad stuff. And then you've had the Wall Street Journal writing an overblown story about terrorist financing, which they subsequently sort of backed away from. I think you may have heard some of this from my colleague, Sean Cassidy. My point is this, just to make this 20-minute rant less than 20 minutes. If you really want to move the Congress, I say this to every crypto person who comes into my office, you got to start demonstrating the killer app, the value add. I get so frustrated because folks come into my office and they say, we have this decentralized finance, non-hierarchical structure that will allow for the transfer of NFTs, and it is like, I'm a Rhodes Scholar. I don't understand a single word you just said, right? So tell me how this makes Bridgeport better. Tell me how this makes Los Angeles better. And until the industry does a better job really showing that, look, we can take remittance fees down from 8% to 2 basis points, or show us any positive world improving application, the industry is not going to have the benefit of the doubt. And the reason you need that is because not so much on our side of the Capitol, but on the other side of the Capitol, the weather is uglier, and people just need to start hearing about how this stuff is going to make people's lives better.
Well, noted. Thank you for giving us the benefit of the doubt out of the gate. We appreciate that, and we'll take that pro tip going forward. Congressman Hill, let's move to the market structure bill. So there was a lot of work done on the market structure bill before I think the public saw the text. You had a lot of negotiations or conversations happening with your colleagues and with your staff. But unlike the stablecoin bill, this was a dual committee bill, which is pretty unprecedented or hasn't been done in a while in Congress. And so can you talk a little bit about that process for you? Were there things surprising about the market structure bill? And feel free to chime in too, Congressman Himes. Were there things surprising about this? How important was it to reach across the aisle and to pursue a bipartisan approach?
Well, thanks, and thanks for inviting me today. And you've had a terrific overview of viewpoints from all your guests. So Jim and I are proud to be together and talk about this. So the Fit for 21st Century Act came together in 3 months. And truly years of research, true, but to kind of boil it down and have it be both a commodity title that will go to the House Agriculture Committee and work through the House Agriculture Committee process, and then the portion that is to the House Financial Services Committee. And you're really pioneering in a brand new area, and you're setting down the answer to the question that apparently nobody could answer, or certainly Gary Gensler couldn't answer, which is, what is the Howey test? How would we define it? How would we measure that this digital asset entity should be treated as a security or as a commodity? How do you trade them? How do you exchange them? How do you have a 144A type process for liquidity in a digital asset company? So my vision of that when we started talking about it was we've got to communicate in a way that the analog world on Capitol Hill can understand. So I said, let's take the terms and the style that you see in the SEC rulebook on raising money, on ownership of companies, and let's apply that in a fit-for-purpose, no pun intended, truly, a fit-for-purpose approach to digital assets, both the trading and liquidity for digital assets that are fully decentralized on a functional blockchain, and those that people would like to raise capital around for a hopeful future decentralized function on a functional blockchain, and deal with both. And deal with the gaps that the Commodity and Futures Trading Commission has outlined to us that they need, the funding that they need, the spot market oversight of Bitcoin that they need. And Chairman Benham was a delight to deal with. But you're right, the first time since 2009 that the two committees worked together. They worked together in the Dodd-Frank environment on swaps regulation following the financial crisis. And my hat's off to G.T. Thompson, the chairman of the House Ag Committee, Dusty Johnson, my subcommittee chair, parallel over in the House Ag Committee. They were very, very good to work with.
Going back to you, Congressman Himes, Dave sort of stole my thunder, but I wanted to talk about your 5 minutes in committee when the market structure bill was being marked up. And he covered the quote, but I think the salient point there is, and what you said in committee, I am confident that this legislation, while not perfect, makes the status quo better. And although 5 of your Democratic colleagues, Mr. Torres was here earlier today, agreed with you and voted with that bill, the majority of the Democrats on committee did not, including Ranking Member Waters. And considering your previous answer on use cases, did it surprise you that more people didn't join the bill?
it surprised me more that people wouldn't join the stablecoin bill, because stablecoin you can get your head around pretty easily, whereas market structure, I mean, you get into page 4 of the market structure bill, and unless you have experience in finance, it's going to be pretty hard. So the market structure bill was far more opaque, and the reason it's important was far more opaque than what stablecoin could mean. And so there you had an added complexity factor. I mean, I was on Wall Street for 12 years, and I did not feel like I commanded the issues associated with the market structure bill all that well. So there you had a much heavier lift. But at the end of the day, the reason I said what I did was, and this is a little bit unconventional for legislating today, where all of us sort of feel like if we don't get what we want, the vote is no. You know, I was pretty confident that the market structure bill as written was not going to open the door to additional malfeasance or bad behavior, which today quite happily, or at least 2 years ago quite happily, lived in the Bahamas, and that it wasn't going to necessarily set a standard that would be irrevocable. So to me, it looked like progress, and I used that argument to try to persuade more Democrats to tell them, look, this isn't adjusting bank capital standards, where if you do it wrong 10 years from now, if the banks melt down, you voted to lower bank cap. That's not this. Again, something as complex and esoteric and untransparent as market structure is a very heavy lift with most members.
Let me add something to that if I could. So we had really strong, consistent for weeks and weeks and weeks bipartisan working groups, both in the stablecoins bill, and Maxine Waters and Patrick had worked on that in the prior Congress. So as to Jim's point, it was not new ground, and I don't think it was confronted with, as he says, the complexity. But we had very good engagement with members of our committee on the Democratic side and the Republican side, working to find best practices on the fit-for-purpose regulatory framework approach. And, you know, I agree with Jim. Every time I cast a vote on the House floor, I'm asking, is this proposal better than the status quo? Does it move the ball forward? And leaving an unregulated situation in the United States where we have just enforcement action after enforcement action, no rules of the road, innovators aren't sure where to take risk, investors don't know if they can invest, people don't know if they're taking a job with a company that has a future or not, and you have all this demand to move offshore, and even big companies are shying away from it. That's why we need a regulatory framework. So in my view, the FTX collapse and even the Binance settlement the other day, it only reinforces that we need to do this and do it in the right way for the benefit of innovation here in the United States. And again, we've worked very hard to keep this bipartisan because we don't consider digital assets or this whole process, you know, a political activity.
Whip Emmer was here this morning too, and he said, he delivered a similar message that this is nonpartisan. So it seems like it was a heavy amount of education in committee. You've passed these bills out of committee at the end of July. And when you think about potentially both bills going to the floor, I know Congressman Hill, you were said this week that there's the potential this might happen in early 2024. What needs to happen with non-committee members who maybe don't have the luxury of diving into the issues because they're not on committee? What needs to happen for people to get comfortable with the substance and to recruit more support for the bills?
Yeah, great question. And look, because of the time lost in the House due to the Republican fight over who the Speaker of the House was going to be, it really placed us behind this fall because of the need to complete the appropriations work. And that means that we didn't have the ability to plan floor time for digital assets bill or the farm bill for that matter. So that's why I think this is an important shift to early 2024. That's point one. Point two, it's very interesting on getting the votes on the floor. On the Republican side, I've worked with my colleagues to educate them about what is a central bank digital currency. What does that even mean? What is it? And how does it have anything to do with a stablecoin bill or a fit-for-purpose, Fit 21 regulatory framework bill? because there's great confusion there if you're not in the loop on this, if you're not thinking about it. So on the Republican side, we want members to see that this is moving American innovation forward, Web3 forward, blockchain forward in a completely, I think, balanced approach that doesn't in any way disadvantage the United States, and in fact gives us a continued advantage. Over on the Democratic side, as you see from Senator Warren, and you may have heard from Representative Caston, a tremendous emphasis on terror finance and I would say illegal or illicit finance evasion through the use of cryptocurrency or blockchain. And so on the Democratic side, it would be my view that we talk to members about satisfying them, letting them understand how both these bills contain strong AML, BSA approaches, and that like everything else in life, if you're in the regulatory framework, there's a much better chance for you to effectively surveil and understand what's happening. And if you're voting against these bills because you think cryptocurrency provides some sort of advantage to Hamas, you're making a huge mistake. Because to not have a good regulatory framework here, a good stablecoin regulatory framework, that is what's going to advantage illicit finance. So I think on the Democratic side, I'll let Jim respond too, but on the Democratic side, I think law and order, AML, BSA is an important component, and over on the Republican side, who do not support a banking at the Fed, central bank digital currency, that they understand that these two things are not connected. Right, I think those are some key points there.
Yeah, I might just add, maybe this is a slightly more democratic perspective. Remember here that on this topic, there's going to be, at a maximum, 20% of the Congress, let's say 80 members, who are going to take the time to sort of understand the basic workings. You're going to have 5%, all of whom I think you've heard from today, who really invest a lot of time and energy in it. And therefore, the vast bulk of members are going to follow the lead of the ranking member, outside groups, Gary Gensler, and I understand that there's quite a spectrum of approachability there, but you know, your average non-financial services, non-ag person is not going to devote much time to this. So it makes sense to show up in that individual's office. It makes sense to show up in that individual's office and talk about a parochial interest if there happened to be a business in that. But the industry needs to work hard to try to get folks that might otherwise be skeptical, Americans for Financial Reform, these outside groups, to at least neutral. Because if Gary Gensler does what he did and says to us a year and a half ago that if you guys pass legislation, you risk damaging my 33 and 34 Act authorities, that may be the only thing that 30% of members hear or remember. And so the outside game, at least on my side of the aisle, because we probably are more skeptical of letting things run in a less regulated or under-regulated environment, those outside groups are really critical.
Yeah, I agree. And one of the things we've seen evolve, I think, in the conversation around illicit finance that I was grateful for is a more sophisticated approach to the questions and how they're evaluating digital currencies and their potential role with illicit finance. And you've repeatedly heard witnesses, I think even before House Financial Services, but also Senate Banking, saying the amount of crypto used for illicit finance is likely overblown. And also it could actually be an effective tool for law enforcement. And absent of saying that in testimony before hearings, what else can we do? Because this is tricky, because I think a lot of the information is delivered in potentially a classified setting. You're both on intelligence. What can we do if we're not privy to that information to help facilitate a stronger, a better understanding of how this is actually a useful tool?
You know, very quickly, just with my intelligence hat on right now, and this is an example of where you can actually just clear some facts up. You know, as the ranking member of the Intelligence Committee, I would tell you that today, now someday mixers are going to get a lot more capable than they are today. Today, I would so much rather Hamas try to move money across Bitcoin than do it in the Hawala system or do it in suitcases full of cash. We have zero visibility in either of those latter two cases. We have utter transparency in cryptocurrency. So again, that's my answer today. There will be people out there who seek to solve that problem for bad actors, but there's a fundamental misunderstanding that today, from the standpoint of law enforcement and intelligence, we would so much rather see bad actors try to move money across a public ledger than not do so.
Completely agree. And I've certainly urged that the Treasury declassify this particular issue in and around Hamas without endangering ways and means and methods and the technical aspects of it, so that we do clear up some of this. I think that would be informative to people. But we've had routine testimony from the FBI, from FinCEN, from Treasury about the benefits, of tracking illicit finance and ransomware on the blockchain. And so I agree completely with Jim's point of view, and we just have to convince some of our colleagues. We have a lot of colleagues that are very skeptical about that, and in our hearing last week, if you saw it, when we had the open source hearing on Hamas finance in the House Financial Services Committee, I tried to purposely ask the Democratic witness to respond to the chain analysis witness and let them have a bit of a modest debate on this point. And this is important to that portion of our voters, Democrat or Republican, where that's a primary issue, that we get the facts out there on that.
So I want to take it back to market structure and stablecoins. You alluded on the potential timing, but what is your take on the viability of both bills, passing out of the House and then the conversation with the Senate?
Well, I'll start and welcome Jim's comments. Look, we've had great conversations over in the Senate with many members, some of which you've heard from during your visit to Washington. It hasn't been, with the exception of Senators Loomis and Gillibrand, a particular leadership situation, but good constructive visits. And of course, we've had significant visits with Senators Snabido and Bozeman over on the on the Senate Ag Committee. But we do need additional engagement in the Senate, so I'll leave it at that in the Senate. We really do. Your help there is very critical, I think. But in the House, I feel good about the bipartisan coalition that we've put together for both the stablecoin legislation and the fit-for-purpose regulatory framework legislation. We're now looking at final red line versions of those bills that contain all the discussion, amendments, suggestions that were made in our markups, and so we'll have those ready shortly. And once we do that, then we'll begin to make that work with Chairman Thompson and Chairman McHenry on our floor strategy.
Well, what French says is exactly right, and we're kind of at the point with the NDAA and the CR and all these must-pass bills coming up where time is short, but as I imagine a successful legislative strategy would involve the stablecoin and market structure bill coming to the floor in a manager's amendment that actually gets even the most aggressive Democrats, and especially the ranking member, Waters, neutral on it. If that happens, a Democratic Senate sort of sits up and takes notice, and if some of the more security concerned, I'm thinking of Elizabeth Warren, some of the more security concerned people come maybe, and not that I claim to be smarter than she is, but come to agree with me that I'd much rather see this stuff on a public ledger than not. And of course, Chairman Brown, you could see a path, but I think it probably starts with a strong bipartisan vote on the House with the two existing pieces of legislation.
I love that you can see a path. That's great. So I want to close with an observation that I think a lot of folks in this room would agree with. When Chairman McHenry was here last night, he alluded to an experience that I bet a lot of members have in their tenure in Congress. And that is, you may be faced with taking a path to power or a path to policy. And I suspect that it's just standard operating procedure for both of you, but what I've witnessed with your teams and with you is your dedication on the path to policy, and the process that you use along the way is thoughtful, it's data-driven, it's inclusive, and allows for diversity of thought. but it focuses on solutions that actually address a problem, but are also sustainable. So it's not subject to the political whims of DC. And at a time when people tend to be pretty cynical of Congress, it is such a breath of fresh air to watch the way you both operate. So with that, please join me in thanking Mr. Hill and Mr. Himes for their time today.